Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be looking at how to draw tabby fur with your trusty coloured pencils. So if this is something that you're struggling with, then this is going to be the video just for you. Before we get into this, I'm not going to go too much into depth on the actual fur technique. If you want to learn a fur technique and how to get really soft, tapered, structured lines, then make sure you check out my how to draw fur tutorial, which I will leave as a card up above and as a link in the description. So for this one, I have listed the pencil colours at the side of this little circle here. I'm using a range of polychromos pencils, that's Faber-Castell polychromos, and I'm using a mixture of light tones, medium tones and dark tones. I'm not exactly sure on the exact colours, but I know there's some warm grey 1 in there, warm grey 2, some ivory, I think there's some Beaster, raw umber, walnut brown and dark sepia as well. So as with any coloured pencil portrait, one of the first things that you want to do is actually put down a really light base. So you want to start with your lightest colour, and for me this is a warm grey 1 or an ivory. I'm using two different colours here to depict where there are warmer and cooler tones within the fur. And when you're putting down your initial base layer, you want to make sure that you really map in the direction of the fur. This is really important that you get this step in at the very beginning, because then you can use that initial layer as reference as you add further layers on top. So with your lightest colour, you're just going to really lightly shade it down onto your paper in the direction of that fur. And you want to make sure that you use a really light pressure when you're doing this. I like to use a semi-sharp pencil when putting my first layer down. Having a too sharp a pencil can lead to you having some really kind of harsh lines, especially if you're using your pencil upright as well. If you do have a really sharp pencil, make sure you use it on the side. But I like a semi-sharp one, and I kind of use it kind of half on the side, half upright. And all I'm doing is just layering that down onto the paper, and then I'm going in with an ivory pencil. So this is going to depict where I've got some of those warmer toned areas of the tabby fur. So just combining these two colours together works really well. So the warm grey 1 I used as the initial colour is going to act as like the cooler tone, and then the ivory, mixing it with that warm grey 1, just makes it a much more warmer colour. Once you've got those initial layers down, then you can slowly start to get darker. So I'm actually going in, I think it's with a warm grey 2 or a warm grey 3, and again I'm just using this in like a shading motion, and I'm starting to add in the areas of the stripes of the tabby. Now this particular reference that I'm using, it's the area in between the eyes, like on the bridge of the nose, so where you've got that classic M shape of a tabby cat, and you've got those kind of dark bits around the eyes, and then you've got those really lighter bits directly above the eyelids. So I'm adding in those bits, and again just working in the direction of the fur, using a really light pressure and some gentle strokes to add in that next layer. Once those initial layers of light colour are down, then you can start to add in your mid-tones. So I'm using a nougat pencil, and I'm starting to add in those darker stripes once again, and this time instead of shading and using the side of the pencil and using quite a light pressure, I'm actually going in with a fur technique. Again, if you want that fur technique, watch that video and I explain exactly how to make those really nice tapered lines and how to get a really nice natural look. And you just want to make those tiny little lines going in the direction of your fur, just in those darker areas, so in that classic M shape to begin with. With this layer, you really want to group your fur lines together so you get a nice concentration of colour. When you start to add the fur lines with your mid-tones, you're going to add a lot more fur lines with those lighter mid-tones, and then as you get darker, you're going to limit or lessen the amount of fur lines that you're actually using on your piece. So with your darker colours, you're only going to be adding a few fur lines and grouping them further apart. But when you're adding in your initial fur lines like this, you want to group them close together so you have that really decent saturation of colour in the areas that you need some sort of darker tone. So at the moment I'm just going into the stripes with a really concentrated fur line, and then to kind of blend them out, I'm just going into the lighter areas and I'm just grouping the fur lines further apart, so you just have this lighter area of colour of those fur lines over the lighter areas. Again, with this layer, I'm just going in lightly to begin with, and then when I need to, just increasing the pressure on the pencil to get that nice saturation of colour down. Once I've finished with that layer, I then start to go in with some more mid-tones, and with this, I think this is a raw umber pencil, I'm just adding in some of those warmer elements, so adding in that kind of almost gingery kind of tone that you often find within Tabby Fur. And I'm just using this pencil to add some shading to begin with, and then starting to add in a few fur lines to kind of blend that out through the lighter patches of fur through the middle of the nose, and also just into some of the lighter bits around the eyes as well. We then start to come into some of the darker tone colours. So for this I'm using the walnut brown, and as I mentioned earlier, with these tones you want to make sure that your fur strokes are a little bit further apart where you don't have such a saturated colour. Obviously going into the darker kind of the iconic M of the tabby is really quite dark, so I'm just increasing the pressure on the pencil in those areas and really grouping the fur strokes together to get that good concentration of colour. But then into the lighter areas I'm really sporadically adding in those fur lines just to kind of add in a little bit of element of shadow in between some of those fur lines on that lighter section. So just to recap, going in a little bit heavier and more grouped in the darker areas, and in the lighter areas leaving them really far apart just to add like a little glimpse of shadow. All the while you're adding your fur lines, you really need to make sure that you do pay attention to the fur direction, especially in this area around the nose, because there are a few different fur directions. So as you can see on the bottom of my circle, I've kind of got some fur lines coming in at like a diagonal, and then as you come up towards the top of the circle, the fur lines are going almost sort of straight up. So you need to make sure that you follow the fur direction and add in those appropriate directions so you get a nice natural look and sort of direction of the fur. And to finish off the last of the darkest colours, I'm just going in with some dark sepia, and again just making sure that I add in those fur lines and keep them quite far apart. You have to be careful when you're going in with dark sepia over some of these colours because you can end up making your area look quite muddy. So just use this really light and sparingly, and take a little step back from your image every now and then to make sure that it's dark enough and to assess whether you need to go darker in a few areas. That's what I did here, just took a little step back and then I decided that I needed to go in and add a few darker fur lines to darken up some areas. Once that last dark layer is in, then it's all about adding in some glazing or some really light shading over the top to really get some of those colours of the fur coming through. So for this again I just used some raw umber, some Beaster, some more nougat, and I actually use a little bit of a caput mortem for a little bit of a red tone. And where you have some warmer toned areas, so where I added the ivory is mainly where I'm going in and adding in the sort of raw umber colours and those warmer tones. And then in the cooler areas I'm just adding in some green, because using green on some lighter toned fur really makes it pop, and it just gives this tabby look a really nice edge, because if you often look at tabby fur you often see like a green tint. So just adding in a little bit of some olive green, a little bit of terracotta and some caput mortem violet or some burnt sienna will help to bring out those tabby tones. So that's pretty much it for this small study. I really hope that my process explaining the layering process and what I'm doing has helped you if you are struggling with your own tabby fur. If there's any type of other furs that you'd like me to cover, make sure that you leave me a comment in the comment box down below. I'm going to leave my playlist at the end here that does cover some different colours of fur, but again, if there's anything that I haven't covered, make sure you leave me a comment down below. And if you haven't done so already and you're new here, make sure that you hit that subscribe button and tick that notification bell so that you can get notified every time I release a new video. I upload coloured pencil tutorials for you guys, as well as studio vlogs showing you a little bit behind the scenes as well. But I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!